we go. Well, welcome again to this month's learning series. This is the monthly webinar series that we provide to members and friends of the Urban and Community Forestry Society. And we really thank our sponsor, the Bartlett Tree Experts, for their sponsorship of this learning series. Bartlett really wants to raise the heights of you as urban foresters and the knowledge that you have to do your job better each time you do it. So we thank them for supporting this. And we thank all of our sponsors and the members for helping make this and our other programming possible. If you are a member of the Urban and Community Forestry Society, we thank you. Your membership dues make this possible, and you get to connect with people across the country and globe who are doing the same job you are. If you're not a member, we really hope that you'll join us when the time is right. So again, we're doing a quick introduction to UCFS, our acronym that we use, and then we'll hear from Rachel Comte about how to articulate a clear and compelling vision for your urban forestry work, leading and engaging meetings and discussions, and how to navigate challenging conversations and difficult one-on-one conversations. This kind of information is always helpful as urban foresters. How do you market your program? How do you get people interested? And especially now as we're seeing a lot of changes within urban forestry work, it's going to be more important than ever to sell your project and make sure that people in your community know how important it is. So really great time to be hearing from Rachel. We'll have time for Q&A, and then at the end, we will drop the CEU credential form into the chat. So as we get started, please drop your name and where you're from in the chat. We'd love to hear where everyone's calling in from or joining us. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you later. We actually post it to our YouTube channel where all of our past webinars are, so you'll get to see it there. Again, the ISA CEU form will be dropped in the chat link at the end, and we will submit CEUs on your behalf. And then you all are on mute, but we'll bring you off mute at the end if you have any questions. So UCFS, if you're not familiar with us, our mission is to build the confidence, and camaraderie of all professionals who manage trees and forests to create and sustain more livable communities. To break that down, we really want to be the membership home for the professionals who make and support daily tree planting and care decisions. If you decide who, what, where, when, or how a tree goes in the ground, you are the professional who is making our big tree goals happen, and we want to provide you a home here. Our job is to make you feel your most confident in your tree planting and care decisions. And we also want to be your voice. You might be a single person in your community, and you are trying your best to both maybe push snow. I'm in the middle of a blizzard right now in Iowa, and our urban forester is busy on snow duty. Then he's also trying to do his tree work every day. So by bringing your collective voices together, our 2,100 plus members, we can have a bigger impact. And that's the power of being a part of an association. For your membership and just general of what our organization helps provide is our City Trees publication, which is actually going to be hitting your inboxes here very shortly. We have other programming that's members only through our Arborist Exchange and Mentorship program. And then we also offer these monthly learning series. I'm just quickly highlighting a few of the areas that we help support urban foresters across the globe. So hop on our website and find out a little bit more. Always feel free to reach out and we can discuss how we help support you as members and non-members alike. And one of the biggest things I want to highlight that we are excited to launch at the beginning of January is our UCFS Membership Hub. So this is the member portal for members only, where you can log in and start communicating and connecting with people. We have a mentorship quick match. We have a careers page. We have groups that you can join if you want to have community within community. And one of the things we like the most, or we like it all, but maybe really excited about, is our discussion forum where you can go on and ask questions. So if you had like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to deal with this sidewalk issue, or does anyone have a sample contract? Log on there, send the question out, and we can crowdsource it across urban foresters everywhere who likely have gone through what you're dealing with. They can help provide you an answer. So again, members only, and hope that you have logged in. And if you're not a member, join so you can be part of it. What's next for us is this March, later this month, is our Preserving Beech Trees for the Future. We'll drop the link in the chat so you can sign up for that. I know especially something on the minds of people on the East Coast of how to manage a beech leaf disease. So Bartlett Tree Experts will be leading that and sharing some of the newest science on managing beech leaf disease. And then also coming up is our Young and Emerging Professionals Career Development Series. We'll be posting more about that soon. But if you are newer in your career, graduating, maybe transitioning, we want to help focus on writing a resume, prepping for interviews, what happens after your first year on the job, how do you make a bigger impact? So that'll be the highlights of our career development series. And with that, thank you again to our members. If you're not a member, really hope that you'll join us. And I'm going to stop sharing here, Rachel, and kick it over to you.
Okay. All right, let me pull up my screen here, and hopefully it won't freeze on me this time. Thanks, everybody.
It's not going to. It's going to be great. So
Thanks,
we see you. It's going great.
Coming back. Coming back. Thank you. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name, like Leslie said, is Rachel Comte. I'm an ISA board certified master arborist, as well as an urban planner with Urban Canopy Works. We're based in the Cincinnati area. We work nationally developing master plans with communities, as well as serve as city arborists for a number of small cities in the Cincinnati metro area that are too small to have or need an arborist on staff. You may be asking, why is someone like me leading this kind of presentation? So first, this is the second career for me. So my first career was in marketing, first traditional and then email marketing and then online search engine marketing. Before ever getting into urban forestry. So I end up looking at everything from a lens of communications and marketing just by default. Second, in my work with communities nationally, I have had to learn facilitation skills. I run community meetings for our master plan work, and it can be as small as 5 people to as large as 150 people. So I've had to hone these skills, and I've done it through courses in facilitation and dialogue, but most useful to me has been a facilitation and dialogue coach that I have access to on a regular basis, which has been a game changer for me. So I wanted to share with you some of the tips I've learned on interpersonal communication through meetings, but also hard one-on-one conversations. So the presentation today is broken up into 3 sections. So communications overall, first point is some things to consider as you're advocating for trees in your community, and that is from a marketing perspective, because advocating is marketing. The second 2 parts are more focused on interpersonal communication skills. Some of this we naturally learn over time, but we should be a bit more intentional about it as it affects everything that we do. We could have multiple sessions and spend hours on each of these pieces. So obviously, we don't have time to do that today. And so we're just going to scratch the surface. But I would want to say too that we are all in different points in our career, and we have varying levels of experience and expertise as of today. Some of this may seem basic to some of you, but I think it's important to all get to the same baseline. Hopefully everyone will get a tip or 2 to take with them today and use in their own communities. Okay, so let's just dive right into the marketing piece with some points for you to consider as you're advocating for trees in your communities. Just adjust something here. Okay, so first point, I encourage you to focus on the end game. So most times we only have a few minutes to capture the attention of our audience. And what I see our industry do is we talk about trees and the benefits that they provide. So we've got our audience, and here we are talking about trees when what they care about most are the solutions that trees provide to their issues, problems, the needs that they have. So most people are trying to get food on the table, get kids to school, make a living. So you see the disconnect here. They care about their lives more than they care about trees. And so we need to solve their issues and problems. So we would be better served to promote the end game. An example of this is with just looking at Apple. Have you ever heard Apple say they make great computers and phones with cool tools and specific operating systems? No, they talk about how they make your life better, more fun, more efficient, more creative. So the idea is sell the problem you're solving, not the tool to solve it. In marketing, we would always discourage businesses to talk to potential customers about their company. People don't care about your company. They don't care about our work every day. They care about how your business or your work can help them solve a problem or address an issue. Another way to look at this, Simon Sinek has come up with what he calls the golden circle. So it's how his study on how most successful organizations think, act, and communicate. In an attempt to explain why some people and organizations are particularly effective, He found that the most effective leaders lead with the why and move their way out. You know, the neuroscience behind this idea is that humans respond best when messages communicate with those parts of their brain that control emotions, behavior, and decision making. So I see us in our community, our industry, talking about the what first, which is the trees for us, and then moving our way in. But again, it goes back to the whole people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Going back to the Apple idea, you know, it's make life easier. If we look at Martin Luther King, his speech was, I have a dream, not I have a 5-point plan, which happy Black History Month, because originally this was going to be in February, but I'm going to say March is Black History Month too. So happy Black History Month. By the way, Simon Sinek cites this as the best way to hire good people too, is start with their why and move outward, not the how. You can train people to do the how, but you can't train the why. Next point, it's not just about what we're saying, but about who is saying it. So when non-tree people talk about trees and their benefits, people will listen. So think about these two quotes in blue here. A local doctor calls for more trees and shade certainly has more weight than a local arborist calls for more trees and shade. So who out there has overlapping missions? And who, it's helpful to look at this list of tree benefits, which we're all super familiar with. But who in our communities has a mission that also overlaps with these tree benefits? So who's focused on public health, or who's focused on energy savings or water quality, whatever it happens to be? And can we get them to help make the case? The third point, we need to remember we're solving a problem for our audience, and take advantage of the fact that trees do solve many issues. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so, you know, going back to school for many of us, this is used to understand what motivates people. Maslow's idea is that people are motivated to achieve certain needs, and that some needs will take precedence over others. So our most basic need is for physical survival, which is the bottom rung. And once we get that met, we move up to the next rung and the next rung. And we spend our lives moving up and down this pyramid. So we are so fortunate that when we map out where tree benefits lie on this hierarchy, most of them are on the lower parts. And that's where you're going to find more of the masses of folks. Everyone's going to be down in the lower parts. You're going to move up into the upper parts throughout your life as things ebb and flow. So, you know, this goes back to what's motivating the masses to take action. So I think we need to be talking about trees in a way that appeals to people's basic needs. Your water will be clean, your business will be more successful, and your family will be healthier. Part of that work is to use the terms that lay people understand. So getting your messaging right. So you can see down here, I'm not going to go through read off the list of all of them. You can read those, but these are the terms that we typically use, like stormwater management. What I see in communities when we're talking to people about this is, what do you mean? Why is stormwater bad? It's rainwater. Why is that bad? We have to convey that this equals water pollution and it equals flooding. We use the term mitigation. The layperson does not use that term. So we need to be aware of that. DBH, that's really the age of the tree, even though we know it's the size, but people are going to think about it as far as the age goes. And if we're talking about air quality, really that boils down to maybe an asthma issue or some sort of health issue. So, you know, and instead of saying local waterways, talk about the specific local waterway you're talking about. So you can read through those. But if we look at that in an example, so we've got what we might see, our urban forest reduces stormwater by 900,000 cubic feet. Well, nobody uses cubic feet. So, you know, instead of saying urban forest, you might want to say trees in Cincinnati intercept this many gallons of rainwater runoff, but then explaining why that's important. This stops oil, antifreeze, detergents, pesticides from flowing into the Ohio River. Now, sometimes maybe you can't have this long of a sentence there, and this second, from an environmental perspective, that sentence there, that's just a giant word salad written by scientific folks. if you were going to translate that into something that lay people can understand, it would be trees provide habitat, intercept polluted water before it runs off our roads into Lake Erie. They remove dust and chemicals instead of particulates from the air, which keep asthma issues lower. And then drilling it down, saying finally they reduce heat stress, which is so important for those over 60 or under 5 years old. And then the last thing I would say here is, instead of, iTree often gives us a big specific dollar number. Instead of saying tree canopy provides 11 million whatever benefits, it's just Charlotte trees provide over $11 million of services to residents. So keeping things very, very simple and skimmable. And then I would also say, last thing I want to say about marketing is, while we often wish we could reach people with one message or via one avenue, life is just never that simple. Don't assume that one message or approach is going to fit everyone you want to reach. Pick a message, think about it, and would this work in your community or in a certain neighborhood? Maybe after some dialogue with some folks in that neighborhood, you might find that doesn't exactly resonate with your audience. So how can you adjust and be open to adjustments? And then also, how are you going to distribute that message out? Mass marketing is often easier to do. Put it together, send it out, but it can be less effective. There is just no replacing one-on-one conversations. And that is resource intensive work that we are all struggling with resources, especially right now. But that may be, maybe that should be a focus, like slower and more effective versus faster and cheaper. Okay, so moving into part 2, so about leading effective meetings, which for everybody's sanity, please, this is so important. We all have been in poorly run meetings, and it's so painful, isn't it? We can all use better facilitation skills to lead meetings, better meetings. Some of you may be really seasoned in meetings, and some of you may be newer in your career. I want to get us all on the same page and start with some basics as a solid foundation. This is a huge topic, again, as all of this is, with many different approaches, and everything varies based on your meeting type and your goals. So I'm just going to scratch the surface here. But first thing to consider is, what is your role? Are you a project lead and gathering everyone to get updates on things, or are you facilitating a discussion for the group to come up with their own decisions and directions moving forward? And second, be clear before you go into that meeting, what you want to walk away with. And sometimes that's very clear. We need to make a decision on XYZ, but other times it takes more thought, and people in meetings will depend on you to have this figured out in advance. And in your agenda, don't just set the topics, but also suggested time allotment for each. People want clarity on what you're doing what we're doing today in this meeting, and they can provide them the information to be able to see that this is going to be a quick discussion or a longer discussion. And then be open and curious and create space for dialogue. So we're going to come back to this in a minute. And then note that we all process information differently, and we process our thoughts differently. Some want to review and plan everything before they walk into a meeting because they want to have some time to think about it. Others are fine winging it in a meeting. So, sending out an agenda in advance really helps those who want to think about it and be aware before they walk in. So make space and for all types of thinkers. And then when you're starting your meeting, make sure people know each other. Oftentimes, sometimes you already know each other, and so fine, no big deal. But if you have one new person in a meeting of 6, you might think, well, we'll just have the new person introduce themselves. But it's important to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves because they don't know anyone. It's interesting how many times that gets skipped. And then, like going back to what we said earlier, define that outcome at the start. Clearly say, we want to walk away from this meeting with XYZ. That's so helpful to people, because a lot of times you're like, what are we doing here? What's our end goal? Think about your room setup. Smaller meetings, this is not something necessarily to address your meeting where you're meeting, but as you get larger, be thinking about this. The room setup sends a message as soon as people walk in as to what kind of meeting this will be. So if you advertise wanting community input, but set up a room in theater style, like that top right photo there, you've already sent a message that this is an expert in the front, listeners in the audience, and this room is set up for one-way communication. Whereas something where it's a boardroom or these table rounds, you've said, okay, we're going to make space for discussion. And the same goes for virtual meetings. Is it a webinar format or a meeting format? Can you see everybody else? In a webinar, like in Zoom, for example, which I'm more familiar with, in a webinar, you can't see any attendees. And in a meeting, you can. So be thinking about that. And then there is navigating the flow of the meeting. So keep things moving for everybody's sanity again. So watch the time. It is your job as a leader. Watch the time and keep things moving. Or if you find you come to a topic that you're like, okay, we clearly need to talk about this further, make some adjustments, but let the group know, okay, we're going to spend another 20 minutes talking about this and we're going to move this to later. But there are always people in a group, whether it's a large group or small group, that either won't let a subject go or dominate the group. And I've put some text in here, and I know this is pretty text heavy slides that I have, but I want you to have them if you want to reference this later. So a couple approaches to handle that dominant person. A lot of times the ones, if they are talking and they want to go down this rabbit hole, I often interrupt and say, hey, John, I'd love to talk to you about this further. You clearly feel very strongly about this. Why don't you and I meet afterwards and we can talk about this further? That usually works. Another way to address it is repeating it back. Okay, John, I see you think this about XYZ. What does the group think? Are there other thoughts about this topic? Or you can have a parking lot list, say, this is something that we don't have time to go into today, but I hear you that it's important. We're going to put this in a parking lot list, which is a list of topics that you're going to include in a future meeting. And then it is your job as the meeting leader to interrupt when needed. The rest of the meeting attendees will thank you if you just, hey, I'd like to bring this conversation back to our original topic. I don't want to keep you any longer. Don't be afraid to do that. Everyone is depending on you to do that. And the last piece for meetings I wanted to say, which is so important, is stay curious and stay open. And this is not always easy. But so what does this mean? So the role of a facilitator, if you're leading the meeting, you are the facilitator, is to pull input and perspectives from people. Otherwise, you don't need a meeting. You could just be working on whatever you're working on by yourself. So number one, build in discussion and exploration into your agenda. So in a small meeting, that could just be setting time for a discussion topic in your agenda. But for a larger meeting, you might want to do small groups. So that's when the tables with rounds might make sense, because in that, using small groups, everyone gets the opportunity to say something, and we all want to be heard. So, you can have people break off into small groups, have a 10-minute conversation and come back to the big group with either what struck you about the discussion or your top 3 ideas. The other thing I would say is provide a way for people to provide input later. And this is more for kind of larger community meetings. But some people, again, going back to that way we think about things, some people want to noodle it for a while to think about it and come back with input later. So we often provide a comment card on the table to say, hey, if you're not comfortable speaking in front of a group, or you didn't get to say what you needed to say, here, leave this comment card with us, or you can email us later. Point 2 and 3 is can be challenging. Resist the urge to respond to a question. If as a facilitator, you are not necessarily there to answer all the questions, so you can turn it around to the group. That's an interesting question that you have there. What do others think? Even if you have an opinion, I think this about this topic, you can always provide your input, but ask the group first. What does everyone else think? And then make a point to listen and not interrupt, even to agree, just to say, if you need to say anything, say, hey, why don't you tell me more about that? Or tell the group where you're coming from. And that, takes us to point 4. Oftentimes in our world as urban foresters, we have the technical expertise, but that does not discount anyone else's experience. So, be open and willing to hear and value other people's experience. I took a class on listening once, which I thought I kind of rolled my eyes at taking that class, but I was amazed how much we need to learn about listening. And listening is not just being quiet and waiting for your turn to talk. It's about putting your opinions aside, being curious, and asking more. And it is so important and sadly undertaught, and can also be physically and mentally taxing. So important though. So especially in our world today. Oh my gosh. So we all need to get a little better at this. Okay, so that leads us into the last piece of this, which is navigating hard conversations. Something to consider here, there is no silver bullet. Hard conversations are hard. We are all finding our way. We all need to manage the conversations, but also manage ourselves. So this just provides some notes for you. First thing I want to say is we have to alter our own perspectives. It is so important to grasp and understand and accept that no, the answer no, or I don't like that, or any kind of negative response to something is the beginning of a dialogue. It's not the end. Dissent is what gives us space for a larger conversation. So when you're having a conversation and someone immediately says no, or I don't like that, or that's wrong, we can shut down and think, okay, well, this is over. But start to be thinking about that as the beginning, because it is okay when people don't agree with you. We are so used to angst and stress when we hear no, but change your thinking that way. This dissent piece is part of a framework, by the way, for good dialogue put together by Peter Block called 6 Conversations. I just put some text over on the right of the slide. We don't have time to cover it today, but this comes from one of those conversations. If you're interested, you can read more about it online. But as far as the dissent conversation goes, Peter Block always says that if people can't say no, their yes can't mean anything. So when dissent is expressed, just listen and resist the urge to solve it, defend against it, or explain it away. Be curious without judgment. And ultimately, this comes down to managing your own emotions on an ongoing basis. We are the best tool in this situation, and we need to manage ourselves. So don't go into a hard conversation ramped up. If you are already tense about something, here are some questions to ask yourself before you go in. What's happening? And am I being objective, or am I just angry, or am I sad about something? What emotion am I experiencing? This all goes into therapy kind of stuff, but what does that mean to me? We all have a story that we tell in our heads about what's happening. And I think it's important to understand, okay, I'm feeling anxious. And what's the story behind that? Well, if I don't come out as a winner for this, my boss won't think I'm good at my job, and start to dissect what those issues are, because we really need to know ourselves if we're going to actively and listen well to others. So let's talk about how you approach hard conversations with some kind of, there's 3 steps in the top right there to an ideal situation. This is certainly, life is never this linear. It doesn't work this cleanly. But step 1, let them talk first. People need to know that they've been heard. We all need to know that we've been heard. Let them talk first. So, I've got, prompt them to start. I've got some suggestions of how you might say that here in the italics. I'd love to hear from you, and then I can share a few things and we can see how we can solve this together, or talk to me about what's going on from the beginning. I want to make sure I'm understanding you. And then instead of just being quiet and waiting for your turn to talk, ask more questions. hey, that someone wanted to cut down this ginkgo tree and I didn't want it cut down. And you might want to say, well, what does that mean for you for that tree to be gone? Or tell me more about that ginkgo, or why is this important to you? I'd like to hear more. And then once they're done, thank them first. And sometimes we kind of skip over that. Thank you so much for walking me through that. I hear you. I appreciate your perspective. Or if you're not sure, what I'm hearing you saying is that you're really angry. Is that right? Or because sometimes they might say, well, I'm not angry, I'm scared. Or, maybe that's not the right example, but um, allow them to reinforce anything that they want to say. And then it's time to share your perspective. And so I would stress to you to use the word and not but. So to say, I've heard what you're saying, but, my reality is blah, blah, blah. To say and is the magic word. And I'd like to share with you now what my reality is in this work. If you're talking about that ginkgo that you had to remove, that's a street tree that everybody loved, or maybe everybody hated it because of the fruit, who knows? But my reality is I need to keep people safe. And this is what we know about tree risk and, or whatever it happens to be. And so, and our goal is to preserve as much as we can. And so how, explaining what your reality is, because we all have our realities in our work. And then go into transitioning in the conversation to attempting to solve this together. And this brings in another piece of the 6 conversation pieces I mentioned earlier. And this one is focusing on possibility instead of problem solving, where everyone takes ownership and solves it together. So after you've both shared, think about possibility thinking. So, you might say, given what homeowner are dealing with this tree and what my reality is, what I need to manage, I'm hoping that we can find a way together, a way forward. So is there a way that we can address this and reach a solution together and see if you can solve it together? No conversation is that linear and that clean. I know that. But sometimes it becomes abusive, especially in the world that we're living in now, which is so hard. So hard. I think many of us are struggling. I am also struggling. But if a conversation becomes abusive, there's basically 2 options. So attempt to de-escalate or walk away. So, if you're de-escalating, I can hear you're upset. Yelling and abusive comments aren't helpful. But this is important to me that we work through this. So can we take a minute just to step back? Or do you want to take a minute? Or do you want to take a break? Or do you want to keep talking? And if you know it, you can't, let's come back to this later. Or, hey, I'd really like to bring in my boss. I think we need to have a bigger conversation, whatever it happens to be. And if you can't resolve it at that moment, go back to expressing appreciation. I'm really glad we had this conversation, and I really appreciate you giving me a few minutes to share what my reality is. If you have an idea of how we can work forward, I'd love to stay in conversation, or let me talk to somebody and come back to you. Sometimes it's hard. These are hard. And my dialogue coach always tells me, because when I say, well, what if they do this or what if they do that? And, she's constantly coaching me. There's no silver bullet for this stuff. We just have to learn to manage ourselves and try to follow this general approach. I also wanted to say too, in today's world, conversations are not just in person. Technology adds another layer of challenge here. So a couple points I would make on social media. Avoid being on the defense. Share as much information as you can and as early on as you can to stay on the offense on social media, because it's like playing whack-a-mole responding to people's comments on social media. So people crave clarity, even if they don't agree. So share what you can on social media. Someone had asked a question before the session about handling misinformation. And that is so important. clarify all of that on your organization's website, your company's website. Here are all the questions that typically get asked, and here's our response, so that when you're responding to social media, you can say, hey, we've got a whole information section on our website about this topic, but get ahead of it instead of responding to it. And then for email, the one thing that I do when we're dealing with the public and other groups locally, as we're city arborists here for a bunch of different cities, I push it to in person, because I have found that people are less, I don't know what the nice word is. They're nicer when you have to do one-on-one in person. So I sometimes just respond back, happy to talk about this further. Give me a call, or let's meet at the site. I would also say hold off on responding if something makes you really mad that you get via email. This goes back to managing yourself. And utilize AI if you're struggling with the word. So this is kind of funny, but Chat GPT or whatever it happens to be, if you write down what you want to say and find a nicer way of saying that. These are tools at our disposal that can be really helpful. So I just touched on so many topics, and I just want to stress that this is a lifelong learning process, and some of your meetings and your discussions and your marketing will go really well, and some of them will be a complete dumpster fire, and that's how you learn. Someone asked before the meeting too about tips for young professionals in urban forestry, and these lists of topics here: facilitation, mediation, negotiation, all of this stuff. I highly recommend starting to study some of this. And I put my facilitation coach, her information here. She's certainly available. I pay her on an hourly basis just as needed. So that's certainly available to you too. These are hard things, but so important for what we do in our work. So thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate that. As we're getting into the question and answer portion, I see a few questions now. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the top of the screen or drop them in the chat. And Rachel, that was really great, because I think people are probably coming at it from a lot of different perspectives. When we first asked you, I was kind of envisioning the kind of typical urban forester who might work for a city going out there and trying to market their campaign. And you took this a really broad perspective. And I think that's really helpful to think about, like, maybe as we're thinking about more community engagement and like literally how do you facilitate a meeting, and setting up the room in a certain way signals to people right away what it's going to be like. Yeah. And I know you do a lot of that through Urban Canopy Works, through helping groups go on a multi-step process as they think about and envision what their community forest could look like. Mm-hmm. Could you say a little bit more? Because I'm envisioning you're the facilitator, maybe working with the city forester. Could you say a little bit more of what that looks like? Good things you've seen from the city forester or whoever might be the kind of tree person, and maybe some not as great things that you've seen?
Yeah. So when we're doing master plans for cities, we pull together, typically, it has different names. We call it an advisory group, and it can have, it's not small. So it's usually about 100 people, because so much of the tree canopy in our communities is on private land. It is just not something that any city or city staff person can fully address. So one of the things we do is put together a group of about 100 people that represents all the groups. So the city staff, maybe county staff, developers, nonprofits, maybe landscape architects, and education, health, the health campuses, large landowners, all of those groups, and then pull them together in these workshops that we do. And we put them in those, we have a 15-20 minute presentation that we do. We have 3 workshops in a row. They're sequential, so it's one every month. And share with them the first 15-20 minutes. We have a presentation where we are sharing some data and of what is existing in place in their community, as far as how many trees they have, how much canopy they have, what all of the groups are doing currently, just share whatever data we're going through as we're studying the community. And then we open it up for 30-minute discussions. So it's a 2-hour workshop. So we prompt them for a discussion. In the first meeting, the first workshop, it's usually 3 questions. So the first group discussion, and they're already sitting in tables of 8. So they're already set up for a small group discussion. And the first question we ask them is, what does success look like for us? How do we, when we're going to run it, we're going to address all the challenges that we're in our problems. We're going to address that. But what are we trying to reach? What does success look like? Because that all means something different to all of us. So we give them about 15, 20 minutes to have that discussion at their table. And then someone at the table is taking notes. So we are going to get notes of everything that's said at every table that we will compile. But then they report back. So it's usually like 10 tables. They'll report back to the larger group what their top 3 findings are. And so they get to talk in their group, and then each group, I give them a minute to have one representative stand up and be like, our top 3 things were this, this, and this. And they get to hear each other. And a lot of times this is the first time that they are all in the same room talking about this topic. And so they are learning from each other and learning from, so the other thing as far as facilitation goes that we set some ground rules for discussion is, and this is, what I've built with the coach that I use, is that you are not at your table reaching consensus. So nobody's trying to convince anyone at your table. We want all the perspectives. So that makes it very good conversation, because it is okay that 2 people at the table don't agree. We're just trying to glean all the perspectives. And then the other thing, we tell them the whole yes and thing instead of using but. So if someone at your table says, the sky should be purple or whatever, and you, instead of saying, well, I don't agree with that, it should be this, say yes, and we should also consider blah, 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 blah. And people kind of laugh at that when I tell them that those are the rules, but you hear them doing it, and it's sort of magical that they're, all of a sudden it just takes the stress out of the room, and they can all talk and disagree, and it's okay. It's really nice. So we do, there's discussions at every workshop like that. And then we, at the end, write up the summary of everything that we've heard in themes. And so through the 3 workshops, we end up with themes of what we want to have, what we have currently, what our challenges are, what our resources are. But it is a messy process, and there's many people that, and I tell them that too at the beginning of the first workshop. For example, I say in the beginning of the meeting, we're not going to walk away with solving this today. We're just starting to download all of the perspectives and all of the concerns. And saying that too also allows them to kind of be like, okay, I know what we're doing today. It's my job to share my perspective, and that's why I'm here. And so it's really well received. So I feel like we've got a good system.
And in my previous job at Trees Forever, we did a lot of community visioning and facilitation like this, and it was at a city or community-wide level, so small towns in Iowa, so 1,500 people. And what you're explaining is a city-wide level too. And I think people here could be thinking about scaling this kind of facilitation too, as we think about community engagement. It doesn't have to be the entire city. Maybe it's a neighborhood or the block you're working on, and
Right.
Who are the faith-based community leaders there? Who are the informal and formal leaders within that defined area? And so this type of facilitation can be scaled, giving people an opportunity to hear what causes them challenges in their community and how trees might address that, and getting to the why. Like by asking that, their why, and now you can try and form an idea of how trees might help their issues.
And I think the other important thing to note is their biggest challenges in their community may have nothing to do with trees, and that is just as valuable. So instead of saying like, that's not our scope here, we're not going to do that. Sometimes we ask, what are the big challenges that you're dealing with currently? It doesn't have to be tree related. Just help us understand what's going on in the community. Because that's also important too. And it may be something that you, as a leader of the meeting or whatever your project is, you don't have any authority, or that's not part of your realm of work, but you can take steps to see if you can connect them with the right people, and you can listen. It's free to listen. So I would, you know, it's okay that these meetings get messy and all over the place, because humans are messy. And that is another thing my coach has had to be like, it's okay. You can let the conversation go where it needs to go. You just have to put some guardrails on it, which is, I think, our job as facilitators.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I see your comment about don't forget to include utility folks in the conversation when you bring them to the
Yes,
table. Always
they
good.
are always there. Yes, definitely. Yep.
We have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would also say with utilities, they're always in those groups. And the one thing that I would tell people too is that, when the second workshop that we have is all about the human element, so not the information on the trees, but the information of all the different groups. And one of the rules of discussion for that, because we are evaluating how engaged all these groups are or are not, like who's not at the table. We all have our mandate from our companies or our jobs or whatever. We have a task that we are assigned to do. So to understand that, and like with utilities, a lot of times they don't want to be cutting trees down, like topping trees under power line. I mean, that costs them money too, but they have to keep the power on, especially during storms. So to be aware of what we're all dealing with, and that we are all doing the best that we can with the resources that we have available. So that's one of the things that we say too, when we start that second workshop, is we are coming into this assuming we are all doing the best we can with the resources that we have. And that's how we're starting this conversation.
Yeah. Good way to frame it. Either in your whole presentation today can go towards community engagement. It could go to talking to an individual homeowner. It could be talking to your colleague you might be having some issues with. So you can kind of think about these in those types of ways.
Yeah.
Rebecca says, could you share more about the listening class? I think everyone's wondering what that was about. She'd love to sign up for one.
Yeah, I know. It was so long ago. It was like 20 years ago. And so that's, before they had virtual meetings. And it was at a community center. And it was just, I think it was a faith-based thing, which isn't my jam, but I was just interested in the topic. And you just realize all the things that you aren't doing well, that we, even just to say, like, as you're telling me something, Leslie, I'm like, oh yeah, I agree. You know what? One time I had this, this, and this. And you realize, and you're doing it to validate you and to say, hey, I'm on the same page as you, but that's not what we need. We need to be listening and not just waiting for your turn to talk. And even if you fully don't agree, to say, I hear you, and I hear that these are concerns for you. And politically, the world that we're in right now, we need this. And, tempers and tension is high. So it's hard for everyone, and including me, but it's needed. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find a link to that. I can't remember what it's called though, but I'll look for it and I'll send it to you, Leslie.
Well, I really appreciate how you, under the part where you're talking about facilitating the hard conversations and asking potentially, I think a lot of us have probably done door knocking or handed out flyers to recruit tree planting spaces and gotten into those conversations. And the tell me more, share your perspective really opens things up. Because I'm always surprised at the question when someone gives you feedback and you start answering it and you've answered the completely wrong thing. And so all you have to do is say, could you say that again? Could you say more? And then they start saying more and you're like, oh my goodness, I would have given something away if I quote unquote if I hadn't asked that question and got a little more clarification on actually answering or what they really were after. And now perhaps it helped my cause or what I was trying to do.
And another thing that is so helpful is people learning from their peers. So it's not always me or you that are the right, especially when you're dealing with communities, neighborhoods. Is there a group already active in that neighborhood that can maybe bring you in to talk about things? Or maybe they are the ones that go door to door. People want to hear from their peers, especially in a world where we don't always trust everything, and it's just everything's so tense these days. So I, always looking for partners to help with that outreach too. Yeah, that's what I would say.
We have a comment from Emily, and Emily, I might need you to clarify this a little bit, but Rachel, I think it was under your facilitation portion where Emily says, I'd love to hear you repeat the statement about being able to say no.
Yes. Peter Block, there's so many resources on Peter Block online. And that is someone that my facilitation coach works with, actually. So I get a lot of his stuff, but let me find that. The dissent discussion. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. No is the beginning of a dialogue, and dissent makes space for a larger conversation. So if someone can't say no, their yes cannot mean anything. And part of the dissent thing, my coach, she has a staff, and they, in their staff meetings, say, okay, I'm going to dissent here. And they know that dissent does not mean you lose your seat at the table or you lose your membership, quote unquote, in the group. You are allowed to dissent, and people are going to listen, even if they don't agree. But we have things to do as far as learning to make space for disagreement. Yeah, that's a big one.
Thanks. And that sounds like what Emily was referring to. So thanks for touching on that again.
Yeah.
And I see a couple of comments here, just general comments. Jody, great idea. I find focusing on listening helps me get over my anxiety of running meetings and talking with groups if I put the focus on others and not on myself. So you're doing two things. You're helping yourself manage your meeting, and you're doing what you're supposed to, of listening to the people in the group.
As long as you can interrupt, as long as, to stop someone from dominating or someone from, but but otherwise, I think it is our role to be quiet and listen and just keep the process going. But yeah.
Well, keep the questions coming. I wanted to refer back to the marketing portion of this and maybe explore that a little bit more, because I think so many people, when you hear the term marketing, you think, oh, I don't have a degree, or it's like making a big, shiny, flashy ad, or creating some sort of spot that you're going to put on social media or on TV or something. So I didn't know if you had any general things. I'm also wondering about, you worked with so many city foresters and communities to do master plans, and now you need to go market that thing. You got to sell it to lots of people, city council, mayor, your nonprofit groups. Have you seen that go really well? Have you seen it go poorly? Like, what tips would you give?
One of the things that helps make the case for implementing these master plans is by having that advisory group so large throughout that those community leaders or representing all those types of entities have been at the table the whole time, so that you have to do very little selling at the end. So that's one thing. I don't know how that fits into people's projects, but bring people along to, it's called co-creation is the, kind of textbook term for it. But instead of building something and then trying to sell it, why not have people buy into the building process? So that's one thing. And that has, and that's what we've heard from so many cities, is the process of going through these workshops and going through this study together is more valuable than the end product. And so, the printed plan that looks all pretty and, 100 pages that very few people will read. We do have short versions because we need it to be skimmable. But I think that the process is way more valuable. And a lot of times in those advisory groups, people are saying, well, I want to be involved in the next steps. What are we doing next? And that's more valuable than any marketing campaign you could do. I will say that, so Leslie and I and Carla were just talking about the grant stuff in my community in Newport, Kentucky. Just lost our IRA grant, and we were going to be planting. It was removing concrete and planting trees. It was $1 million grant, and we just lost it. And one of the things when the media was asking about, what was it that we were doing, and we have techs, and we, because we were a year into it. But we're able to say, This project was all about reducing heat for public health through trees by removing concrete and adding trees. But it wasn't, so I think what we do in our community is say this was a tree planting campaign. And yes, that is what it was, but that's leading with the what and going into the why. But what people are going to connect with, readers of whatever media outlet, is they were reducing heat, public heat stress through this, and that's what's gone. So I think we need to be talking about that more. Because just leading with that end game is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I completely agree. And like you said, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So your enthusiasm, your excitement for things gets people excited as well, and then bringing them along. And I imagine some of our conversation about the facilitated meetings and bringing people along in an advisory group might feel like, oh my God, it's going to be a lot of work or it's a lot of time. And it's no doubt about it, it is. Mm-hmm. But I think the investment up front is incredibly helpful, just for the reasons you've detailed. And it might not be as hard, or you might have partners, like you have a nonprofit partner who can help you take off some of that burden, or maybe the other department, Parks and Rec department, and you're in Public Works, maybe they're doing some of this already and they can tack on some of it to the facilitated process they're going through. So just being kind of creative in how you reach out.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say about kind of selling the at the end of a master plan, trying to implement it and selling it to city council and all of that, it's one thing for the city forester to try and sell something, but if the public contacts your elected officials saying we have to implement this, or we want this, so that's another thing to kind of sell it and make the case by having the community contact the elected officials instead of you trying to you as the city forester trying to make the case with elected officials or your city manager or whatever it happens to be. That's also really valuable. That's like having the doctor say that trees are important for health versus a tree person say that. So that's another way to do it.
Yeah. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour. In the chat, Carla has dropped the link to the CEU form. Please click on that if you would like to have ISA CEUs, and we will submit those on your behalf. Check out our next learning series here in 2 weeks. I believe it's on the 19th. I hope I have that right. Preserving beech trees. So again, especially for those on the East Coast, hope that you tune in for that. And then we'll have our next learning series posted very soon. Check out our member portal if you are a member and continue the conversation there. And we hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.